Let's talk about CTCL. This is their top 21 grants. Again, that we've been able to discover because they're not an open organization. It reflects $81 million granted, every one of them to a city that Hillary Clinton or a county that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. $81 million. Let's move to the next slide, please. About March of 2020, we started to see a couple of things that were concerning regarding the election. One was a score of friendly lawsuits. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The left initiated dozens, scores of friendly lawsuits to change the way the election was done. What I mean by a friendly lawsuit is when you sue an official knowing that they're going to agree with you, so that they don't put up a defense to your claim and actually settle it and give you all that you're asking for. I'll give you an example in Virginia where the League of Women Voters filed suit saying that the witness requirement for absentee ballots under COVID was unconstitutional because it put people's health in jeopardy. That suit was filed against the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the Attorney General of Virginia, a role I had in Kansas, was tasked with defending the suit. In the first paragraph of that lawsuit, the League of Women Voters actually quoted the Attorney General of Virginia saying that the witness requirement is probably a violation of the Constitution because it's unsafe in COVID. Within 1 week, he capitulated in defending the Commonwealth and agreed to a settlement that eliminated the witness requirement on absentee ballots. Those suits were filed across the nation, challenging not only the witness requirement, but deadlines of counting absentee ballots, the requirement of a postmark, the requirement that the ballots be given to a clerk. All of the protections of the absentee ballots were challenged by the left in litigation, claiming that COVID prevented them from being carried out. That happened in March. For the Attorney General of Michigan to say that those who disagree with her should be investigated criminally, where was she in March when those on the left were undermining state law? That was passed by the legislature. Now, I don't believe any of them should be criminally investigated, but certainly it should have been spoken of that these lawsuits were to undermine protection for the integrity of the absentee ballot. Why do we have those protections? Because the absentee ballot is cast away from the polling place. When you vote in person, there are persons trained to measure whether you're being intimidated, whether you understand, whether you're being coerced or being misled. Away from the polling place, none of those protections are present. That's why President Jimmy Carter and James Baker said that most fraud occurs with the absentee or mail-in ballots, and we need to protect that. And that is why most all states have some protections like signature requirements to compare signatures, applications for absentee ballots, requirements of witnesses for absentee ballots. All of those were eviscerated in this election, either through friendly litigation or through Mark Zuckerberg's monies and the dictates of what they would do. David Plouffe, March 2020, Mr. Plouffe wrote a citizen's guide for defeating Donald Trump. And on page 81 of that book, he said that it's going to come down to a block-by-block street fight in the urban core to turn out the vote if you're going to defeat Donald Trump. At the time, he was working for Mark Zuckerberg. He's Obama's former campaign manager. Not long afterwards, we started to see CTCL, which has averaged about 1.2 million a year, suddenly reaching out to create grants. And they started calling Democrats. The Democrat mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, was contacted. And they said, look, we're going to give you, it was $100,000 total. But you're going to turn around and you're going to recruit Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, and Milwaukee. Give them $10,000 each so that the five of you can come up with a plan, and we got more money coming. So this small group gave out about 8% of its annual revenues to one city, and they knew more was coming because they were granting monies to recruit other cities, and they told them which cities to recruit. And with that, these 5 cities came up with, and that's pretty remarkable, the Wisconsin Safe State Voting Plan. Now you have to understand that federal law requires every state to come up with their own voting plan. They have to submit that plan to the federal government. In return, they receive federal dollars. They cannot change that plan unless they have public hearings. That plan requires that they treat every voter equally and disperses the funds in that fashion. Here, 5 cities claim to have their own Wisconsin Safe Voting Plan, and this was developed with Mr. Zuckerberg's money. In that safe voting plan by these 5 cities, which they claimed for the whole state, they said they wanted to, and all of the effort is really to turn out the vote in these Democrat cities. It's not safety, it's turning out the vote. Encourage and increase absentee ballot, provide assistance to those filling out the ballots. They actually hired witnesses for the ballots because the absentee ballot required witnesses. How do you witness a ballot being filled out by a person whom you do not know? We generally require notaries to do that, not hired witnesses by Democrat officials. Deploy additional staff and technology improvements, and that was all paid for by Zuckerberg, and expand in-person curbside voting. I want to take a moment and have James step up here. I'm sorry, James, wait a second. I think it's a little bit later. Here are the grant numbers. Well, no, come on up here. That's in Wisconsin Safe Voting Plan, James. Tell them about these grant numbers. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the press, American people. My name is James Carlson. I have the privilege to serve the Amistad Project and the American people. This slide right here in front of you is the Wisconsin Safe Voting Plan of 2020. And going from the vertical axis to your left, you'll see encourage and increase absentee voting by mail. So those are actually directives. Dramatically expand strategic and voting education, launch poll worker recruitment, training and safety, and ensure safe and efficient election day and administration. What you have here is a plan that was developed by the 4 cities in Wisconsin to submit to CTCL in exchange for grant contracts. And so that's what's in front of you here. And there are cities, it's actually 5, Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, Milwaukee, and Racine. And so working across, you begin to see the amount of dollars that have been allocated to these cities. Now, to give a little context to this, Phil mentioned the HAVA plan, the Help America Vote plan. And so I'll back out just a little bit and describe that for you so that we can understand that. The Congress appropriates money to the Elections Administration Commission, EAC, who in turn disseminates that money to the various states under what are called state implementation plans. Those are HAVA implementation plans. They're adopted by the various legislatures, and then the commissions, the various commissions from each of the individual states. Those commissions now are responsible for administration of elections throughout the various states. And so that's how the system works. Here we have private money that was injected at the last minute by private entities. Now it's important. One of the basic questions, it's a basic civics question that I think we should ask here. And that is it legitimate to allocate private money for public elections? Very, very basic question. Can you legitimately allocate and inject private money into public elections? So that's what we have here in front of us in the Safe Voting Plan, Phil, of Wisconsin.
And James is going to come up in a minute and explain to you how these cities already had adequate funding from the federal government to implement these plans. And I want you to notice, though, how much money is allocated towards voter turnout. This money is going to a Democrat stronghold to provide voter turnout, while at the same time they primarily claim this money was necessary because of COVID. Voting absentee, this is from the Safe Election Plan by these 5 cities in CTCL, you'll see that state law, or they claim state law, is an impediment. Voting absentee by mail has been complicated by the imposition of state law requiring voters to provide voter ID. So in other words, they are planning on ways to circumvent or undermine that law passed by the state legislature. That's not the role of the cities. They should not be doing that. Here is Philadelphia, and we obtained these documents pursuant to court order in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. We sued over this, and our lawsuits are still proceeding. They're not going to be done anytime soon to affect the current election. They're going to take months and years to litigate. But we have sued CTCL regarding this because, as James mentioned, we believe it's pretty clear that privatization and incentivization of election offices is not lawful. Now, I'm not saying that's a crime. That's a different thing. I'm saying it's not lawful under our laws relating to election integrity and the manner in which elections will be conducted. They dictate to the city of Philadelphia that you'll have 800 or more in-person polling places on election day. That's a requirement for the grant. And here you have the city and commissioners will have secure drop boxes. It requires and dictates drop boxes to be available. And drop boxes, again, require a chain of custody that was not provided in Philadelphia or Allegheny County or Pittsburgh or any of those areas. Satellite election centers. This is significant in Philadelphia because that was a specific term that CTCL dictated that they have. Not satellite polling places, satellite election offices. Now, these satellite election offices actually received ballots. They acted as a polling place, but the city argued with Zuckerberg funds that because they were called satellite, no Republican needed to be present, because the law required members of both parties to be present in polling places. And even though these performed the same function, they were not called polling places. They were called satellite offices. Again, transparency is lost. This is CTCL's math and how they involved themselves in Virginia. And a couple of things about it, when we started criticizing them, their response was, we gave to more Trump counties in Virginia than we gave to Clinton. Well, that is technically true. They gave to 13 Trump counties that he won in 2016 a small amount of money. They gave to 8 Clinton counties large amounts of money. Hillary Clinton only won 8 counties in Pennsylvania in 2016. They gave 100%. They gave to all of the Clinton counties. They gave to 13% of the Trump counties. And they gave millions, early money, planned money to the Clinton counties. Late, small amounts after receiving criticism to the Trump counties. Here's how it played out. I'll take you to Delaware County, Pennsylvania, 1 drop box for every 4 square miles. That's 2 miles by 2 miles square. That's you could walk out the door and stroll and vote. Plus they had mobile pickup units. And they had 800 satellite offices in Philadelphia. In the 59 counties that Trump won, 1 drop box for every 1,159 square miles. At the same time, Governor Wolf was shutting down in-person polling places. All of you know that Republicans prefer to vote in person on election day and Democrats prefer to vote in advance. They were making it easier to vote in Democrat strongholds, harder to vote in Republican strongholds. In Democrat strongholds, go for a stroll or wait for somebody to pick up your ballot. In Republican areas, go on a weekend vacation and engage in a Where's Waldo hunt for a drop box. That's wrong. That's government putting its thumb on the scale. And then there's this, a clawback agreement in every contract that CTCL did with Mark Zuckerberg money that says if you do not follow our plan, we're going to take back our money. All of it. You have to do what we say. And James, if you could step up and talk, explain to them how that undermines the financial integrity of these cities that receive the monies.
The word, think of it this way, the word clawback implies a visual, claw back. And so we found the clawback provisions in the CTCL contracts that were executed with local governments, local electoral officials, And these contracts, the CTLC contracts with clawback provisions, had within them specific language that said you must spend, the electoral officials must spend the money on specific things, drop boxes, satellite votings. There was a whole host of things that were stipulations in the clawback agreements. And so what we have here is a private agency giving money to a local elected official and entering into a contract requiring these local precincts and electoral officials to do specific things. There again, you have blending of private and public entities. That's the issue. And so in terms of the clawback, they had stipulations for absentee ballots and drop box locations, like I said, and plans and maps. But there was something else that we saw in our report, and I really encourage you to obtain and read the report, and that is that the contracts over time, the contract to Philadelphia, which was $10 million, there was a $10 million grant that was given to the city of Philadelphia for executing safe and secure elections. What we saw over time is the language in the Philadelphia CTLC contract, and there's a link to that contract in the report, is we saw over time that those contracts became more and more vague. The clawback provisions were still there, but they became more vague. They became more opaque after the lawsuits came out and after some public scrutiny began to fall on CTCL. So we saw that. So that's one problem. The second thing is, and this is probably for local governments something that if you are the recipient, a local government that was recipient of CTCL funding, that you should consider, is that grant, the clawback provisions actually could impose a future liability on your county that could impact your bonding. That CTCL, if they came and required that money back, it's conceivable that your county could face a future liability for the money if CTCL asked for that money back and chose to exercise that clawback provision.
Thank you, James. And these grant requests generally require a report by the end of the year by the cities, and it gives CTCL the sole discretion as to whether to demand the return of the funds. This is the Philly grant agreement that we obtained pursuant to court order and the plan identified by Philadelphia. And you see right there that in each satellite office, they're going to have these persons: judge of elections, 2 inspectors, 1 clerk, and 1 machine inspector. By the way, again, the machines were purchased by Zuckerberg money. And just a brief comment about the machines. You can't see inside a box. You know, we used to have elections where you dropped your ballot in a box, and to count them, you had to open the box. Well, the way you open the box of a computer is to get access to the computer logs. Every forensic computer person will tell you that. You have to have access to the logs. And guess what? The Secretary of State of Michigan and others are trying to prevent America to have access to the logs. They're not letting you see inside the machines. The very machines that count America's votes, they don't want you to see inside. It's like saying, we get to look inside the box, but you don't. That's not right. Who accepts that as a transparent election? Why don't we ask the next question? Why can't we see inside the box?